We need to switch to English. The session starts officially. We already connected with the next chairperson and the next speaker. So Fabio, the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon again. Here we are for the American session, East Coast, New York City, with Riccardo Lattanzi. And Riccardo started his scientific career as a student something like 20 years ago. Correct me if I'm wrong. And now he's one of the experts in MRI innovative technology for musculoskeletal, working as associate professor at the New York University. Go on, Riccardo, you have 15 minutes by now.
Okay, thank you, Fabio. Let me share my screen. You should see now full screen, right? So, yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Fine.
Okay, thank you, Fabio. So before I begin, I have to disclose that I have a patent related to this subject, and I'm a member of the Scientific Advisory Board of QBio, which is a company in California. So let me tell you in a few slides how I got from Bologna to New York. I joined the Laboratory of Medical Technology in January 2000 for my thesis, so Fabio was correct, 20 years ago. And at the end of 2000, I graduated in electronic engineering, discussing a thesis entitled Evaluation of the Effectiveness and Usability of a Multimodal User Interface for a Surgical Simulator for Orthopedic Surgery. And my advisors were Professor Angelo Cappello, I don't know if he is joining the call, and Dr. Marco Vicecondi and Dr. Cinzia Zannoni. And then about a few months before I graduated, Marco offered me a job. And I was happy to accept. So in January 2001, my status at LTM changed from student to research scientist. And that lasted approximately until the summer of 2003. And I'm glad to have learned that my years at LTM were part of a decade of excellence. And my research work focused mostly on HIPOP, the software for preparative planning of total hip replacement surgery, and on augmented surgical planning. At LTM, I published my first article as first author, and then a few others, including one on beauty for surgical planning. While working at LTM, I also had the opportunity to spend 6 months in the United States. In particular, I work as a Fulbright scholar at the Medical Robotics and Computer-Assisted Surgery Laboratory at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. And I was supposed to learn how to accurately reproduce the HIPOP preparative plan in the operating room and bring the know-how back to LTM. Instead, I fell in love with the US, and just a few months after being back in Bologna, I officially joined the LMT Diaspora Club and flew back to America for a graduate school. I didn't go south, but I spent the following 5 years in a cool place. I earned a master's degree in electrical engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a PhD in medical engineering and medical and electrical engineering from the Harvard-MIT Division of Health Sciences and Technology. And my research focus back then switched to magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, and I was lucky enough to work under the supervision of Dr. Daniel Sodikson, who is the inventor of parallel MRI. And that brings us to my last move. In 2008, I moved from Boston to New York, and since then, I work at the New York University Langone Health. You can see here the NYU Medical Campus along the East River, and we are located in Midtown Manhattan, and we are farther north from the main NYU campus, which is in Washington Square in the Greenwich Village. And my primary faculty appointment is in the Department of Radiology at the NYU School of Medicine. I also serve as the Director of Training for the Center of Advanced Imaging Innovation and Research, or CARE. And my research work focused mainly in 3 areas: electrodynamic simulations for coil design optimization, non-invasive estimation of tissue electrical properties from MR measurements, and quantitative MRI of the musculoskeletal system. And today I will talk briefly about the last one. So what do I mean by quantitative MRI? One way of seeing it is that the MR scanner is not used as a camera, but as a scientific measuring instrument. This means that we don't care too much about acquiring beautiful images using always more powerful cameras or scanners, but our goal is to reconstruct quantitative parametric maps that show biological changes. And we don't want to replace standard morphologic imaging with quantitative imaging, but rather provide both of them to the radiologists to enhance and improve diagnosis. In my work, I focus on the application of quantitative MRI to detect cartilage degeneration. The reason is that microscopic changes that can be detected with standard morphologic MRI are only visible in the late stages of osteoarthritis, whereas quantitative MRI can detect changes at the cartilage biochemical level, which occur in the early stages of the disease and can be reversible. For example, here you see the initial loss of protoglycans, which are these proteins, and the loosening of the collagen. And the first quantitative MRI technique I focus on is degemerik, in which the T1 relaxation time is measured after the injection of a gadolinium contrast agent, and the value of the measured parameter is specific to the loss, to the depletion of protoglycans, and can provide early cartilage, can provide a probe for early cartilage changes. And here you can see an example of a degemerik map, and you see the articular cartilage of the hip here, and the values here are in milliseconds since we're measuring, as I said, T1 relaxation time. And my clinical application is femoral acetabular impingement, which is a bony abnormality that can be surgically corrected. And early detection and staging of cartilage damage is important here because it correlates with surgical outcome and prognosis. The first thing we did was developing a method to analyze degemerik maps to make potentially damaged cartilage stand out from the surrounding normal cartilage. We did this by using an internal reference to standardize the parameter values, and red in the resulting maps means that there are at least 2 standard deviations lower than what we define as normal. So you can clearly see the regions which we consider abnormal. And here on the side, you see a standard proton density weighted MRI of the cartilage at 3 Tesla. And on the left, you see a representative standardized degemerik map. And in this case, the area of abnormal cartilage, here indicated by the yellow arrow, stand out with standardized degemerik. And we use the central femoral cartilage, which as a reference for a healthy cartilage, and normalize the map. And that's because in femoral acetabular impingement, usually the central portion of the femoral cartilage is healthy until you get to the end stage of the disease. And in this specific case, the cartilage lesion was confirmed by arthroscopic findings by the surgeon, but erroneously reported as normal on morphologic evaluation by the radiologist. So we proved that we can provide some additional information to improve the diagnosis. And morphologic MRI is still useful, don't get me wrong, but we say that degemerik can detect the loss of protoglycans, but that is not the only biochemical change in early osteoarthritis. So for this reason, we then decided to measure also the T2 relaxation time, which can probe changes in collagen architecture. And the big challenge was to measure multiple parameters in clinically feasible scan time. You know, MRI is pretty slow. And in addition, we also wanted to acquire these parameters for a series of radially oriented imaging planes orthogonal to the hip cartilage to avoid partial volume artifacts. To do that, we developed a technique based on the principle of magnetic resonance fingerprinting, which allow us, as a result, to acquire our 6 radial sections of the hip with a clinical spatial resolution of 0.6 millimeter in plane. And we've been able to acquire simultaneously proton density map, T1 maps, and T2 maps. And these schematics show the position and the orientation of the 6 radial planes we acquired. And this plane has to be precisely prescribed by the MRI technician using multiple scout images. So this is not optimal, and for this reason we implemented next an automatic prescription of the 6 equally spaced radial slices orthogonal to the acetabular opening, and in this way we were able to accelerate the imaging protocol and improve the standardization and reproducibility of the protocol. And we're also working on a method for semi-automated segmentation of the hip cartilage using the simultaneous acquired proton density T1 and T2 maps. And our long-term goal is, of course, to translate quantitative hip cartilage evaluation into clinical practice. And we are conducting a longitudinal study to assess the utility of quantitative MRI, in our case, a combination of degenerate and T2 mapping for cartilage diagnosis and prognosis for FAI patients. So I said degenerate, but T1 mapping with additional gadolinium is basically degenerate. And we are planning to enroll 100 patients and with a follow-up at 12 and 24 months. And we have also ongoing technical development as we want to optimize the encoding capabilities to achieve higher signal-to-noise ratio of the parameter maps, and also to move from 2D acquisition to three-dimensional isotropic acquisition of the whole hip cartilage to have a better visualization of the lesions. And we're also looking to add additional parameters, for example, one that is called T1 row. And we're also working on software tool for data visualization and interpretation for the radiologist and the surgeon. So that was a brief summary of my work on quantitative MRI of the cartilage, but I've mentioned that I also work on coil design optimization to improve signal-to-noise ratio, so I would like to spend the last few minutes to show you 3 examples of other musculoskeletal MRI projects at NYU that overlap with my research work. And we're specialized in developing multinuclear coils. This is work led by Dr. Ryan Brown, who is the director of our radiofrequency laboratory. Here you see a home-built coil array that can acquire standard proton images as well as phosphorus images. And phosphorus is less abundant than protons and water in the body, so the images have intrinsically lower signal-to-noise ratio, or SNR. And these plots here show for a slide in the tide the resulting images, and you see that the constructed coils are almost almost double the SNR of conventional commercial coil for phosphorus and proton imaging. And so what can we do with this? So MRI provides the unique ability to study metabolic and microvascular functions in skeletal muscle using phosphorus and proton measurements. And we can look at the anatomy at higher resolutions and quantify fat in the muscle, for example, with the standard proton imaging. Then we can also acquire dynamic blood oxygen level dependent measurements that reflect the microvasculature function, like you may be more familiar with the same protocol for a functional MRI in the brain. But with phosphorus, we can also locally assess the phosphocreatine recovery kinetics following a plantar flexion exercise. And this basically can be useful in diabetic patients to diagnose diabetic peripheral neuropathy, or DPN. So this is another example. One of our musculoskeletal radiologists, Greg Chang, has been using high-resolution MRI to look at bone quality in patients with osteoporosis. He first demonstrated that MRI can be more accurate than DEXA using a 7 Tesla MRI scanner. Here you see the high-resolution images and the biopsy specimen confirming what he was seeing with the MRI. And as you know, MRI is not great for imaging bones, but it can image bone marrow, and from that you can evaluate the trabecular architecture. He then translated his work at 3 Tesla for clinical translation, developing a pipeline to detect the risk of fracture. The pipeline includes the high-resolution 0.23 millimeter in plane resolution MRI at 3 Tesla, which is fed to finite element analysis that extract the mechanical properties of the bone and can predict the risk of fracture. And then this final example is work by Dr. Bei Zhang, and we have developed a new approach to construct flexible coils. We call them high-impedance coils. And here you see our first glove coil prototype. Now we have a new one. There are 8 elements in the glove coil. Each finger has an element, 2 elements on the top of the hand and 1 at the palm also. And you see that we can obtain high-resolution images when the hand is strong. But flexibility, we can curve the ends to hold something without losing image quality, and here we hold the pitch For example, now you can see how the flexor tendon deforms during grasping task motion, and you can do all these other things due to the flexibility of the coil. And we can also acquire dynamic.
The wrist flexor movie acquired with the hip.
Oh, sorry. I got the slides from I didn't know it was the audio, but basically we can also acquire dynamic images. For example, this is a wrist flexion movie acquired at Tesla. So these were just a few examples of musculoskeletal MRI projects at NYU. Now, before concluding, I would like to tell you how special LTM has been to me. In my years at LTM, I have met outstanding scientists and wonderful people. Some of them are still among my dearest friends, like for others, but more importantly, at LTM has a special place in my heart, because at LTM I met my wife Marta. Here she is last week when we celebrated Thanksgiving, and she's also an alumna. She worked with Luca Cristofolini for her thesis in mechanical engineering in 2002. And then I also, last but not least, I would like to thank Marco Viceconti for being the best mentor I could have hoped for. Marco taught me how to do research and write papers, and we have always remained in contact during these years. In addition to science, we also share a passion for rock music, as you see here. And with this, we wish happy 30th anniversary to Laboratorio di Tecnologia Medica, and thank you for your attention.
Okay, Riccardo, absolutely on time, right on time. Thank you very much for your presentation. Very brilliant as usual. For any questions to Riccardo, please use the table during the next break. Okay, therefore, I guess that we can move on with the next session, that is in silico medicine, and chaired by Marco. Okay, go on, Marco.
Thank you very much, Fabio. So the first speaker of this session is another newcomer of the Medical Technology Lab, Nino Lamattina. Nino, are you there?
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. So Nino will present an early stage work that we're doing using the prediction of femoral neck fracture to simulate in silico clinical trials of bone drugs. Whenever you're ready, Nino.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
I just went to
Go.
the screen. Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Antonino Lamattina. I think I'm the last one that joined this group. I arrived in January this year, so it's less than a year that I'm here. And I will talk to you about this study, very embryonal and starting, that we are doing to go to phase 3 in silico trial for bone drugs. I'm working inside a Biomed European project that aims to bring biomedical simulation to supercomputing centers. In a couple of minutes, we will discover why we need the supercomputers to do these kind of simulations. Why we need the in silico clinical trials? Because phase 3 clinical trials usually require thousands of patients, and they need a lot of time to follow up from some years. So this is a very expensive and time-consuming procedure, and for some rare disease, there are not such a large number of patients simultaneously living on the planet. So it would be great to reduce the experimentation at human level, but something working also for animal experimentation while maintaining the predictive power, ideally increasing this power. What can we do about this? We are working on femur fracture risk, and we are using quantitative CT scan and to inform a finite element model. Femur fracture, is recognized, is a big burden for our healthcare system, and this can only be worse and worse with time because we are in a continuously aging population in our west world. We can try to estimate the femur strength by using quantitative CT scan to know the femur local elasticity model and use it in finite element modeling. To do this with a lot of virtual patients, we need a lot of virtual patients. And there are two possible ways. One is collect and analyze a lot of real patient data. Like the very big mastodontic number that I saw with Benedict's presentation, I was very, very impressed by that number. Why we instead are trying to create synthetic data from a smaller real collection using an approach very similar to what Lorenzo Rassi showed before. The problem is that we want that our synthetic data represent in some way the original population, so we can do a mix of the original patient, and we want that this separation, for example, if we put 20% children and 80% elder people, we would like that the synthetic code will maintain these characteristics. And then another problem is that why phase 3 clinical trials are performed, because we are searching for rare effects that are not seen during phase 2. We don't want to sample the center of the population, but we want to find someone from the tails of the population distributions. Let's start defining what is the model that we are using currently. I worked on the automation of a model published by Dr. Zainab Baltai at the Engineering Institute in Sheffield. It is a proximal family finite element model that simulates side folds in 28 different loading conditions, different angles. We have that the load is applied at the failure head center. The model is free to rotate around the near rotation center with the axis perpendicular to the loading direction, and is contacting with a frictionless contact with a rigid lateral plane. And as I said, different load orientation are explored because failure strength is very importantly dependent on the load orientation. The simulation architecture is the classic one that was described previously. We have the manual segmentation to obtain a 3D STL model. Then from the model we derive a 3D mesh with ANSYS. We do a material mapping using Bonemat, and then we run the different full angle simulations also with ANSYS environment. What we obtain at the end is a critical load map. That is a map of the load that the failure has to withstand, the load that will cause failure using strain-based failure criteria. I automated this pipeline. The most important thing is not what is the other pointer? Okay, it's not as well the mesh creation. The most important thing to automate is this different falling angle simulation. The automated pipeline is running on the supercomputer of the Sheffield University and on Dutch National Supercomputer Cartesius. Why we need HPC facilities to do this? Because for doing this 28 full angle simulation, more or less 45 core hours are needed for each patient. So you can imagine that for doing this for 1,000 patients, we need 45,000 hours. That are pretty long time if we had done it serially. As factory estimators, we used two different approaches. Battery is running low, so okay. One is minimum cycle strength, supported by the previously cited Zainab Baltai work. It is simply we take the minimum of the critical load and we take this as the minimum the factory estimator. The other one is a little bit more sophisticated and involves the generation of load, of possible load that the patient is experiencing when he's falling, and it takes into account patient date and weight, and uses starting falling height and velocity, the closed soft tissue damping, possibly protector presence, and so on, in a statistic way. Then we have this falling load population, and we evaluate for each angle what is the fraction of fallings that will cause fracture. So we average it over the tested angles, and we have an absolute risk of fracture at time 0, because we are not trying to estimate the bone evolution yet. So what is our starting original physical cohort? This is the so-called Sheffield cohort that was collected at the University of Sheffield. It's composed by 98 coxacephal femur CT scans of postmenopausal women, and it is a paired cohort. It's composed by 49 fractured women, and for each one non-fractured woman with the same age, same height, and same weight, but not fractured was collected. I replicate this work from Dr. Pinaki Bhattacharya from the Insigno Institute, and we show that the absolute risk of fracture at time 0 and also the minimum support strength are way better estimated than the total aerial BMD and neck aerial BMD. Please remember the threshold that we found for minimum support strength and absolute risk of fracture, but we are using them later. The first thing that we tried was to find a way to separate the control and the fracture distribution without knowing which patient was which, because for this original population we know at the beginning what was the exact classification, but at the end we will not know in the virtual cohort if we will be able to separate the things. So we try to fit the distribution with the sum of two Gaussians, one for fracture and one for control patient, using expectation maximization in Python. And for both of for minimum support strength and for absolute risk of fracture, the fit was pretty good using Kolmogorov-Smirnov evaluating test. And more important thing, the two found Gaussians are well centered with the real population of fractured and control groups. So we were pretty happy, and we went on a generation of the virtual synthetic cohort. We use active appearance modeling applied to 94 patients of the starting cohort. This algorithm was done from Professor Max Taylor at the Flinders University. The procedure is the same of that described by Lorenzo Grassi before. So there was created a median mesh and was morphed to fit all the other femur geometries, and PC visible component analysis was used to analyze node coordinates and element Young modeling. Then we resampled the visual component distribution to create this virtual patient, and randomly assigned height and weight to this virtual patient based on the original distributions. What we obtained is a distribution of minimum support strength and absolute risk of fracture that is still bimodal, is described also in this case by sum of Gaussians.
3 minutes.
Yes, and the weight of the Gaussians, we show that they are 50% control, 50% are fractured. So we went on to compare with the original distributions, and we show that the virtual distribution are broader than the starting distribution, and Kolmogorov-Smirnov test rejects the null hypothesis that the samples are coming from the same big distribution that are sampled with 1,000 or with 100 samples. We also see that the difference is in low minimum support strength or in high fracture risk that are the fractured people. And in fact, the main difference in the Gaussian allocation is not in the control group, but is in the fractured group for both of the distributions. But what if instead of looking at distribution, we only look at the threshold? In this case, with the minimum tensile strength, we obtain a population that is also in this case divided 50% in fractured and 50% in control, while for absolute risk of fracture, we have that the population is shifted more towards fractured people, apparently. What we concluded that this way of generating our virtual cores maintains some of the original core characteristics, mainly the fractured and control ratio that was 50% at the beginning and 50% more or less after, and using similar thresholds. We also said that we have heavier tails using this approach, and we have a worst case of a representation, maybe because we used a biased original cohort. Most of these cohorts were very negative. The mean value was minus 2.5, with most of them reaching minus 4. And we are now studying the correlation with principal component coordinates and surrogate risk estimators such as the ratio of biomechanical lengths and the width of the cortical bone and so on. And we are looking at some simple and smart way to tune the virtual core sampling first to match some target populations. Next steps is to include the virtual an evolution of the virtual density and the bone mineral density, and simulate the evolution over 10 years. This will need a lot of computational power, more or less 450,000 core hours. So there is mandatory to have HPC facilities to do this. And then by using this simulation as a placebo, as a control group, we want to try to simulate an osteoporosis clinical drug, using the old bisphosphonate briquenyl trials as a validation. So all of this is ongoing work. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Nino. Question for Nino during the last break. And now we move to the one but last speaker. Again, as a younger member of staff, Cristina Currelli. Credibility assessment of computational models to support medical decision. Cristina? Cristina, we cannot hear you.
Sorry. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Now we can hear you, yeah, we're muted.
Okay. Can you see my slide?
Yeah, everything is okay. You can start.
Okay, thanks Marco for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cristina Currelli. I joined the LTM group almost 1.5 years ago, so I'm quite new in the team, and I'm happy today to present in this online conference and talk about a topic that I personally like and that is considered one of the most important issues for in silico medicine. So how to assess model credibility to support medical decisions. So as we already saw in other previous presentation, in silico medicine can be defined as the use of computer modeling and simulation in healthcare. So the models can predict something in advance and help the doctors and support medical decisions. And the interest in predictive medicine is growing fast during the last years, among institutes, companies, and also among regulatory bodies. Also, the European Medicine Agency recognized the benefit of the use of computer modeling and simulation in healthcare, and recently issued a specific recommendation to facilitate the use of computer models in clinical trials, and recommends to set standards to assess if the models are safely used. And I think all of us agree that making in silico healthcare reality is a dream. So let's think, for example, about one possible application of in silico medicine, which is called in silico trials, where computer models are used to generate virtual patients in which we evaluate the safety and efficacy of a new medical product. So, for example, what if we can test COVID-19 vaccine also in silico and reduce the number of people involved in the clinical trials and accelerate the process? Or let's think another possible application for in silico medicine, which is called digital patient, and have the possibility with a patient-specific model to help the surgeon to decide if for a specific patient, let's say at risk of vertebral osteoporotic fracture, is better or not undergo surgery. So I think all of us agree that this would be fantastic. But I think also all of us agree that we have to be very careful, and before using the models, we have to test them. And in particular, we have to first identify, understand, quantify, reduce, minimize any possible source of errors and uncertainties. So we first have, of course, to collect evidences that our model is predicting the phenomena with the required level of accuracy. So in other words, we have to first assess that our model is credible. So how do we do that? How can we test our models? So the process of defining rules and guidelines is not completed yet, but a few years ago, the American Society of Mechanical Engineering published a standard called VNV40 about assessing credibility of computational modeling through verification and validation with application to medical devices. And basically, they suggested us to follow the workflow that we see in this slide. So first of all, we have to clearly identify what's the clinical problem, the so-called question of interest, and then we have to clearly identify what's the role and scope of our model in addressing that question of interest. So we have to identify how is our model contributing to the decision being made, and this is called context of use for the model. And then the second fundamental step, which is the core principle of the VNV40, is called model risk assessment and definition of credibility goals and factors. So basically, we have to quantify what's the risk associated to an incorrect model prediction, and based on that, we have to define the level of rigor of our credibility activities or tests. So higher is the risk associated to an incorrect model conclusion, let's say because the role of the model in addressing the question of interest is high, and also because the answer to the question of interest has a crucial impact to the patient health. So higher is the risk, and higher must be the level of rigor of our test. So more difficult has to be passing the test, basically. And once we decide this, we have to plan and perform and execute the analysis, the test, through the so-called verification, validation, and uncertainty quantification activities. And the main answers to these activities, the results of these activities have to answer to the questions. In case of verification, the main question is, did we solve the mathematical model correctly? In case of validation, the question is my mathematical model a correct implementation, a correct representation of the reality of interest? And in case of uncertainty quantification, the question is, what is the uncertainty related to my model input and how this propagates to the model output? So based on the results we have, we can first assess how the results are relevant to support using the model for that context of use. And then the final question is my model credible for that context of use? So if the answer is yes, we can proceed with the so-called qualification process and ask regulatory bodies to accept the new methodology into the clinical practice. If the answer is not, we should, of course, work a little bit more and or redefine the context of use. So now, briefly, what's the contribution of our group in Bologna into the field? So we work on different projects, different applications, and each of them touch a specific aspect of the model credibility assessment procedure and on the qualification process. And also we have a platform where experts from all over the world can exchange ideas and work together. And I personally, I recently worked on the verification of WSSTB. WSSTB is an agent-based model developed by University of Catania. Is a model of the human immunosystem, and in a project we are involved, a European project we are involved, called SplitWAD. WSS is used to evaluate in silico the efficacy of a therapeutic vaccine against tuberculosis. So we started working on the first model credibility activities, and in particular on solution verification. And we proposed a methodology and an approach to identify and quantify the numerical error associated to the solution. So basically, the VNV40 standard gives us general guidelines on how to assess model credibility, but the specific verification and validation activities have to be formulated based on the model we are working on and based on the type of model. So we decided to split the analysis in two main groups, one related to the deterministic part of the model and one related to the stochastic part. And we designed the activities in order to answer to some questions. For example, what's the effect of considering time as a discrete variable, or are there any possible combination of inputs that give us in output an unexpected trend of the solution results? Or also, how many times do we need to run the stochastic model in order to have a good estimate of the model results? So this method, this procedure, allows us to identify and quantify some numerical errors, identify some limitation of the model implementation, and of course allow us to improve some algorithm details. So the conclusion of my presentation is a is a general message that guides me during my work. So we are not a machine, so our human body is not made by well-known materials, and so the models can be perfect. However, the models can be useful. So instead of, maybe the question, is my model fully validated, is not the right one, and we should ask, is my model good enough and credible for that context of use? So I can say that making in silico healthcare a reality is of course difficult, but not impossible. So we have to be careful and do things well. I want to thank you all for listening, for being here. I want to thank the In Silico Medicine Group, in particular Marco and Roberta De Michele, and of course all the members of the LTM group. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cristina. Okay, it's been a long day and presentation that keep us away from our deserved drinks. So think about being late in your presentation, Enrico. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce Enrico Dallara. Enrico,
hi, Marco. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, is it better than that?
Yeah.
Can you see it?
Try to advance.
Yeah,
it's working. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.
Before I give you the floor, I just wanted to say that it's a particular pleasure to have you here. Enrico started many years ago in the medical technology lab, and then he went around, and then we met again in Sheffield. And so I had the opportunity to work with him twice, and both times it was a great pleasure and a great excitement. Enrico, the floor is yours.
Right, thanks a lot, Marco. I mean, I think that there is no pressure then with this introduction. Thanks a lot, Marco. I mean, it has been a pleasure to work with you on both cases on my side and to be mentored by you. So I hope that there is still a number of years great collaborations. So I'm in Sheffield, as Marco said, and basically I was asked to talk about bone remodeling, which is an exciting topic. But before I jump into that, just a couple of slides, about my scientific journey. So as Marco said, I started in LTM in 2006 when I was doing my final year project for the Master in Mechanical Engineering, and then I spent there 1 year of research where I was doing a lot of micro hardness tests and compressive tests in Massimiliano's lab. And basically there, I remember that the first day I was there, a colleague from the computational group came to me and said, look, you're new, but we're organizing the 15 years anniversary of the lab. Do you want to join for a party? I said, well, yes, I was a student at that time. So I said, okay, well, I picked the right master to do. And therefore I went to the party. And there are two things that I remember of the party, mainly. So one is the huge pork that was on the spike rolling. It is the largest porchetta ever that Saulo showed a picture of it earlier on. And the second one was Marco that was dancing and rocking the dance floor for the whole evening. And unfortunately, I couldn't find pictures about that, but I will keep looking. After this experience in Bologna, I went to Vienna and I did my PhD there in Philippe Distet's group doing validation of finite element models for the human vertebra and femur. And then I moved to Sheffield, joining back Marco as a Marie Curie Fellow, and then I started my academic career there. And 1 year ago, actually, I got married, and so we had a party there. And I can still say that, well, Marco still knows how to do it and how to rock the dance floor. So well done, Marco. I hope that in the future I will be able to do that as well. So a couple of words about Sheffield. It's in the north of England. Not many people know that, but it is known for three things mainly. One is the stainless steel was discovered there and was produced there. There is a huge amount of beers, or I should say ales, that are produced there, and I guess that nobody is able to taste all of them. And then it's a very green city, so there's a beautiful Peak National Park in between Manchester and Sheffield. And if you come to visit us, please join in a walk. And then from the bioengineering point of view, of course, there's Insigno, has been founded by Marco a few years ago, and now it's a great success, and we have many academics working in bioengineering and in silico medicine. So in my team, we do mainly bone biomechanics. So I do a number of applications and method developments for preclinical and clinical applications, but need to talk about what we can do preclinically to evaluate bone or to predict bone changes over time due to interventions. And the main motivation is that, well, we have seen from the previous talks and the previous session how well we can use clinical data to try to predict fracture risk, but by converting CT data to finite element modeling. But actually, if we would do a similar approach also preclinically, we could improve our understanding of the effect of novel interventions. And maybe in the long shot, we can combine, let's say, in silico trials with preclinical trials, or in silico preclinical trials, if you want. So that is actually an area of research that is active in my group to try to convert these approaches. And we started this work with Marco when he was there in Sheffield, and now it's one of my main point of research. So I did that, can we really create multi-scale computational models to bridge preclinical and clinical applications? So I tried to put our pipeline in one figure. So basically, it's like 5 years in one figure, which is very difficult. But then I will go in details on some applications, and I will provide more information about a few of these parts of the pipeline. So the idea is that we can take a mice treated with different interventions. We can scan at high resolution the whole mouse tibia, or the peripheral side in this case, at different time points with our in vivo micro-CT procedure. We spent a lot of time in optimizing the scanning procedure not to affect the bone remodeling with the radiation. And then we can measure a number of properties from the microstructural level, density distribution in different regions of the tibia, and even build our finite element models from in vivo micro-CT scans to provide a biomechanical assessment. We spent a lot of time in validating the output of the model to give them credibility. So we'll mention that a bit more detail later on. And then we can use all of these approaches to evaluate the effect of interventions, which is what is interesting for me. And then recently, we have combined in vivo micro-CT imaging, finite element models, and mechanoregulation algorithms in order to try to predict how a bone or how that bone of that animal will change over time. And of course, then we can compare these predictions with our in vivo assessments with in vivo micro-CT and understand how accurate our models. So in terms of validation, you've seen many presentations from Benedict, Lorenzo, Enrico before, showing how many validation studies are there for human bones. Well, we were not so lucky for the mouse tibia, so we decided to do 2 validation studies. The first one is to understand how good can the model be to predict the apparent properties of the bone, so the structural stiffness and the strength and the normalized properties. So with Dr. Sara Oliviero in my group, we designed this study. We collected 20 tibia from different mice. We scanned them with ex vivo, but by using the in vivo scanning procedure that we use. We test them in the lab, measure the experimental properties, and then we built a number of finite element models out of each image, and then to try to understand which one is the best predictor. And even the simpler models, which are standard homogeneous linear hexahedral models, can predict the normalized properties at around 80% of pi square with a slope and intercept which are quite close to 1 and 0. So we were pretty happy with this, with the apparent properties prediction. But the question was now, how can this model predict the local properties? Because we know that the local strain will affect our predictions of bone changes over time through the mechanoregulation algorithms. So we decided to do another study where we built a tiny jig that can fit inside a micro-CT system and perform stepwise loading of this mouse tibia and then we can build the fine element models from the unloaded scan. And then we can use digital volume correlation. So as Gianluca presented brilliantly before, also for this application, we are using a global approach developed in Sheffield that tell us what is the displacement and deformation during underload of that particular tibia. We can match the boundary conditions and then compare the displacements in the middle of the bone. And if we do it for a number of samples, we can see that naturally we get a nice linear prediction between the displacements, the predicted displacements and the measured ones, and we can then accept the errors that are actually associated with this approach. Of course, now we are seeing that for some specimens we are overestimating a bit the displacement. Therefore, we are working understanding why and if other models can reduce this error. And then we can use our approach to evaluate the effect of interventions. So it's a busy slide, so I try to guide you through them. So we built an in vivo study where we have four groups of mice, an overactomized mice group, and then 3 groups of mice treated with PTDH, which is an anabolic treatment, mechanical loading, and a combination of them. And here you can see the results from the trabecular structure in the proximal part of the tibia. So we have the trabecular bone volume fraction and the trabecular number, and on the bottom we have the cortical area and the cortical thickness. And in the shaded gray you see the control group, which is the OVX group, and then in the other colors the treatment group. And as you can see, as we know that the overectomy had an effect until week 18 when we started the treatment, you can see how we can now compute the effect of the treatment on the morphometric parameters and understand which one has a higher impact. For example, if we look at the cortical thickness, we see that the combined effect of the PTH and mechanical loading has a higher effect compared to the PTH alone after 4 weeks of treatment. But in terms of mechanical loading alone, the differences are pretty small. So we were interested in understanding how those impacted the structure. We can also look at density distribution over time. So here, if you look at one table, I present the change in density in bone mineral content, actually, with respect to the baseline, so at the start of the treatment, in different sections of the bone, from the most proximal C1 to the most distal C10. And in time, of course. So again, these are it's the age of the mouse, and I remind you that we treated the mice at week 18. And here, what I wanted to show you is that just PTH shows a pretty homogeneous effect in terms of changes of bone mineral content. It's a pretty homogeneous anabolic effect. Mechanical loaded had a much more focalized effect on the proximal part. And the PTH plus mechanical loading group had a summative effect somehow. Now here is, again, I wanted just to show you the trends. We do the same analysis, but instead of having one table per treatment where we just split the groups of the tibia, here we split also between different compartments, so lateral, anterior, posterior, and medial. And again, just the message is PTH has a pretty homogeneous effect. Mechanical loading has a very high and localized effect in the medial-posterior, in the lateral posterior compartment, and the same thing is for the combined group. But how does it affect the bone strength? Well, we can use now our fine element models to evaluate, to estimate that. So these are unpublished data, all the work of Dr. Brian Roberts in my group. And what he shows is that the PTH plus mechanical loading group has a significantly higher effect on the strength and the stiffness and on the failure load compared to the other 2 groups, so the mechanical loading and the PTH alone group, even though we had only a small effect in the cortical thickness. So the last part of the talk is about what Dr. Visan Chong is doing. Actually, she developed a pipeline to predict bone changes over time, combining in vivo microCT imaging, simulation of physiological loads from fine element models, and then mechanoregulation algorithms where we show how we predict if bone is changing, is added where it is more mechanically stimulated or removed where it is less mechanically stimulated. So we can predict bone changes across all the tibia, and we can then compare it to the in vivo micro-CT experiments. So if we do so, basically here I just report the total BNC but we can see in this paper published recently in ACTA all the details. We can see that experimentally the BNC is reduced over time in the group of animals mechanically loaded. So this is the only mechanically loaded group before the intervention due to overactomy. And then we have an increase of bone mineral content over time as expected by the effect of the mechanical load. And in our prediction, actually, we don't do a bad job, but we still underestimate a bit the bone mineral content after the first set of loads, and we overestimate a bit the bone mineral content after the second application of the load. So, and this is due to the fact if we look at the spatial match in apposition and resorption between the predicted model and the experiments. So in blue here is where we predict well the apposition or resorption. In red is where we don't predict it well. We can see that we can do a very good job in predicting apposition, but we do a very bad job in predicting resorption. So something is missing in the models that we need to take into account. So I hope that I showed you in a very few minutes what we can do with in vivo micro-CT imaging in preclinical studies for studying bone remodeling. The mechanoregulation models can predict well the global density and the local bone apposition, but not the resorption. So we need to improve that. And in our group, we are going to focus on improving that by assigning more realistic physiological loads and including also some heterogeneity in the mechanosensation and in the biochemical stimuli. So I would like just to conclude showing that we have also developed 2 web services that are now open to others to use for doing this analysis on the mouse tibia or also for our bone digital volume correlation approach if you are interested. So these are developed by a software developer in my group, Will Griffith, and if you look at the links there, you can then have a contact. You can contact us if you're interested in using these services. And finally, I would like just to close by acknowledging all the group and the funders, and in particular, again, Sarah, Bryant, and V to do most of the research job, and Will for the help in the software development. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you to you, Enrico, for this beautiful presentation, which was also the last of this online conference. So just a couple of words of goodbye before we move to the more social part of the event. Meanwhile, Roberta, if you want to load the slide with the tables where the last group of speakers can accept questions, please do so. Yes. I think that this has been an amazing event. We counted more than 150 people that passed through during the day. The level, the quality and the breadth and the depth of the presentation is amazing. I was reflecting how many of you still work more or less in things that are historically topic of the medical technology lab, whereas others took completely different directions. But in both cases, the result is absolutely world class, and I honestly cannot be prouder than this, that we have contributed even to a minimal amount to such beautiful science. I was scrolling the name of the participant. There are still 90 people online, and I want to say special hello to some, like Alberto Pancanti, who was with me in the very early day, Piera Virgili, worked with Fabio again very early. Sanzio Bassini, ciao Sanzio, thank you for joining us. Sanzio is the head of Cineca Supercomputing Group and has been working with our lab for many, many years. I see some people who have connection with me through Sheffield, like Norman Powell or Luca Modenese, who is now in England elsewhere. Although I heard rumor, Luca, I need to talk to you later on.
Long story.
Long story. I'm sure it is. Anyway, my point is, thank you very much to all. It's so beautiful to see so many people that for completely different reason and completely different trajectory are connected to the Medical Technology Lab. Thank you for joining us today. So now we have the breakout sessions. Those who want to discuss their presentation with the last group of speakers, move to the channels enabled Table 1, Table 2, Table 3, and Table 4. The general channel, which is where you are connected now, will stay open. And the idea is that now you pour a drink to yourself and we chat. We spend some social time together. I fully appreciate that this is a very poor approximation from having a nice drink in a conference or a nice dinner somewhere, but these are what the times allows, so let's try to make the best out of it. So with this, I officially close this conference, and I would like to thank all the speakers, all the participants, all the people that contributed to the organization of this conference and event, in particular Roberta De Michele, who's being the true engine behind this event. And I have already my drink here, so please go and prepare your. This is a gin and tonic, by the way. And thank you very much to everyone.